well, however, the material once enclosed has been stripped from the cover sheet, leaving small wads of paper beneath the staples that held the documents together. Other historical data that ought to be in the subcommittee records are documents provided to the panel by McCarthy. These included a McCarthy to Tidings letter of March 18, 1950, listing the names of 80 loyalty and security suspects at state and elsewhere, some of whose anonymous cases McCarthy had earlier recited to the Senate. Enclosed with the McCarthy list was a letter from the head of the Central Intelligence Agency concerning one of the 80 suspects. In addition, McCarthy that same week gave Tidings a list of 24 other names as potential subjects of inquiry. All told, a pretty sizable package of information on the most burning issue of that day and many days thereafter. As these papers were part of an official proceeding of the Senate, and as we know from other sources they were in fact provided, they should all be in the Tidings archive. Again, however, so far as diligent search reveals, all of them are missing, with no explanation of what happened to them, no hint that they were ever there, and no withdrawal notice. They are simply gone. Since they were documents central to any assessment of McCarthy's charges, their absence is a critical gap in the archival record. That absence, it bears noting, affects more than our understanding of Joe McCarthy. It affects our knowledge of the issue he was addressing, and thus our comprehension of the Cold War era. Such problems with McCarthy cases didn't cease with Millard Tidings, but would also occur with the records of McCarthy's own committee, when he became himself the chairman of a Senate panel 3 years later. It's evident that a lot of records here are likewise missing. A notable instance involves the case of Annie Lee Moss, a security suspect in the Army who appeared before McCarthy at an historic committee session. In the hearing record, reference is made to an Exhibit 18, an FBI report about Mrs. Moss, that was obviously important in gauging the merits of the case and what McCarthy had to say about it. But there is no Exhibit 18 to be found in the archive of the McCarthy panel pertaining to the Moss case. Nor are such troubles confined to official sources. They extend to private sector data that should, in theory, be open to researchers. A significant case in point concerns the famous speech McCarthy delivered in February 1950 at Wheeling, West Virginia, kicking off the whole McCarthy epoch. As is well known, what McCarthy said in this speech became a hotly controverted issue. Much of the dispute revolved around a story in the local morning paper, the Wheeling Intelligencer, saying McCarthy claimed to have a list of 205 communists working at the State Department. This quote appears in every book we have about McCarthy and many histories of the Cold War. McCarthy would, however, deny he said it, and whether he actually did so would become, and remain, the cause of vast confusion. The task of researching the Wheeling speech and sifting collateral data on it prompted the thought that, while all discussions of the subject fixate on this one story, there may have been other items in the local paper about such a major event in the life of Wheeling, and if so, these accounts might shed some light on what McCarthy did or didn't say there. This hunch, as it turned out, was correct. However, a trip to Wheeling would reveal that these documents, too, were missing. For one thing, the Intelligencer no longer had a morgue of stories from the 1950s. Instead, back issues of the paper were now on microfilm at the Wheeling Public Library. This seemed fair enough, and as the library was only a couple of blocks away, not an overwhelming problem. However, a visit there produced another disappointment. All issues of the paper, dating to the 19th century, were microfilmed and apparently in their appointed places, except the issues that were in question. Conspicuously absent were editions for January and February 1950, the sequence jumping, without explanation, from December 1949 to March 1950. Written inquiry to the librarian produced no reply as to what had happened to these records. The further thought then occurred that the Library of Congress, which maintains back issues of numerous journals from across the country, might have intelligencers in its holdings, and indeed the library does have such a collection, except, again, not these particular issues. According to the notice provided by the clerk who checked the records, the library had no copies of the Intelligencer prior to August 1952. That made 3 trips to the well, and 3 times the bucket had come up empty. This is perhaps enough for now about the subject of disappearing records, which will recur often in these pages. It should be added that some of the items mentioned did survive in other less predictable places and were recovered. However, a couple of connected points need making about primary source material on such issues and its availability or lack thereof to would-be researchers. Again, these problems concern not just the facts on Joe McCarthy.